Good evening, everyone. I'd like to officially call to order this hearing of Columbus City Council's Housing Committee. Earlier this year, the City of Columbus and Franklin County declared racism to be a public health crisis. At the heart of this declaration has to be the acknowledgement of the reality of systemic racism. The complex interaction of policies, procedures, laws, and institutions that have created disparities in the criminal justice system, employment, healthcare, education, and housing. The manifestation of these disparities can be identified through the examination of the racial wealth gap, where here in Columbus, residents of color are in greater debt and have less wealth than the city's white residents. According to the Financial Empowerment Roadmap, the median household income for Black households in Columbus is $35,569, which is 40% less than that of white households. In Columbus, 33% of Black households and 31% of Hispanic households have zero new wealth, whereas 17% of white households have zero new wealth. We can also identify the disparity if we examine the lack of access to employment opportunities that provide a true living wage. Here in Columbus, nearly 40% of Black workers make just $15,000 or less a year, compared to 14% of white workers. Black and Latinx women are more likely to live in property, making up 24% of Columbus's poor residents, despite being the largest group to have attended college or to have received an associate's degree. If we examine the inequities in healthcare, which have been highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, we would see that Black and Latino people have been disproportionately affected by the coronavirus, being 3 times as likely to become infected and twice as likely to die from the virus as compared to white people, which in part is contributed to the fact that the largest share of underlying chronic health conditions, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, rests with people of color, and also in part because this same community makes up the population that falls into the essential worker category, the category where working from home is not an option, and where not showing up for work means that you do not get paid. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm talking about the pandemic or the racial wealth gap if we're here to discuss housing legislation. Well, the reality is that housing insecurity is not evenly distributed across the population. Whether we are talking about evictions, homelessness, or poverty, housing insecurity disproportionately affects people of color, older adults, the disabled, and low-income wage earners. We cannot have a substantive conversation about housing without recognizing the impact of systemic racism and the manner in which it has seeped into every institution in our society. It is oversimplistic to assert that our housing and eviction crisis would be solved if we only focused on building more affordable units. And let me be clear, building more units must be a major part of our strategy. We know that we are not building enough, but we also know that it's going to take more than just additional units to solve this problem. If wages remain stagnant and access to true living wage jobs, healthcare, and educational opportunities don't increase, we will continue to be riddled with the vestiges of a housing crisis. Homelessness, food insecurity, increased violence, mental health challenges, and the list could go on. There is no silver bullet that will end our housing crisis, but there are actions that we can begin to take that will shift our system and move our community forward. Housing is at the very basic level of our needs as humans. There is no reason that individuals or families in our community should not have their very basic needs met and protected. Tonight, I will be discussing 3 pieces of legislation that I believe will have a positive impact on housing in our community And I look forward to having this conversation with all who are participating and viewing tonight. I want to take a moment and acknowledge my colleagues who have joined the Housing Committee this evening and provide an opportunity for them to address the hearing. Council Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Favor. I'm sorry about the weird light in back of me. I should have turned it off, but alas, I didn't. And I'm really grateful to be here. And I am so glad that you have convened this look at our housing policies. Thank you for highlighting the roadmap, the financial roadmap, and some of the disparities that as you said, existed long before COVID, but matter. No, turn that back on. Sorry. It's comedy hour over here. But matter that much more now coming out of it. And I think that there couldn't be a more timely moment for you to introduce these reforms, because it has to be an all hands on deck approach. When we are able to come out of COVID-19 to level the playing field for families. So thank you for your leadership. And I really look forward to learning from you and the other experts that you've assembled here tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Dorans.
Thank you, Chair Favor. Just wanted to say, I just appreciate you having convening this hearing tonight, and also just like level setting from the start here. You know, when we talk about housing, it can be very sort of siloed off or separated from a lot of other issues. And I think you did a wonderful job. You know, I like to talk about wages and wage growth in our community and what that means to people. And I think you've done an excellent job of weaving that in with housing and healthcare and all the different societal and systemic outcomes for people in our community. So this is not just a conversation about housing, even though it is. And I just want to say thank you for bringing this together and approaching this in a holistic manner to ensure that we have this sort of community-wide discussion about what housing means to people and certainly what we can do to support folks. So thank you. Appreciate the time, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans. Councilmember Remy.
There we go. I always say the space bar unmutes. It doesn't unmute. I'm not sure what's going on. Anyway, thank you so much, Chair Favor, for convening this meeting. I think that we know that I just got off a call with the Community Shelter Board, and we know that housing and a roof over your head is essential to survival, of course, and certainly ultimately success. So look forward to the opportunity to learn during this meeting. As a realtor, you know, these are important policies that reflect our community. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right things here in Columbus that really make the difference. So I appreciate you convening and certainly look forward to the opportunity to learn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Tyson.
Thank you, Councilman Favor, for hosting this hearing tonight. Housing is certainly a basic need that everyone needs to be able to have stable housing. And I will just share some information from the Commission on Black Girls report that, of course, we surveyed 422 girls, and of those 422 girls, the girls between 11 and 15 years of age, 60% of them reside in rental homes or housing. And in terms of the 16 to 22-year-olds, 73% reside in rental or rental homes or apartments. And what that says, why this is so important, is that, as you said earlier, you know, first of all, you can't build wealth if you're in an apartment or renting a house. So to your point earlier on, that how important it is not only to be in stable, first of all, be able to have a decent, livable home, but we also need to make sure that we're providing for our families, Black and Brown families, to be able to purchase homes. And there's so many reasons why that is so important, besides building wealth, but also adding stability to Black and Brown families. So I'm excited about this hearing tonight, and we want to do everything we can to ensure that for me, especially that our girls are able to move from rental housing to being able to be homeowners. So I'm excited about this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. And Council President Hardin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief. I think you heard from our colleagues, one, that we are appreciative of your leadership and are certainly supportive of the path that you laid out. From regardless of its source of income or rent receipt, these conversations are critically important right now as we continue to grow and continue to add folks. As we traverse our way through a pandemic unlike anything we've seen in over 100 years, these conversations are critical to taking care of that 1/3 of our community that are not able to be a part of the success that others are feeling. I was just also, as Council President, I just applaud your process. Over the last month, your outreach has been deep and wide, in talking to all groups, all stakeholders, and I think that where we are right now is because of the input that you've received so far from all of those stakeholders, and I think that we will learn and grow even more tonight. So I'm just really appreciative of your leadership, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Council President. And so we'll go ahead and open it up to Director Michael Stevens to provide any opening remarks or just to bring greetings on behalf of the Department of Development.
Thank you, Chair Favor. I appreciate you having me here this evening. On behalf of Mayor Ginther and the Department of Development, I want to thank you for the time and effort you've put into this, but also for the partnership that you and your colleagues at Council have provided, not only this year, but in previous years, as we work to address our housing needs in the city of Columbus. All members of our community deserve safe, stable, affordable housing. We need to work together to remove the barriers to provide that. And our future economic development success is going to be driven by our workforce and our availability of housing that our residents can afford. These discussions and future discussions on how we continue to attract housing and affordable housing to our community is going to be critical to success of our job recruitment efforts, as well as continue to position Columbus as a leader throughout the country. So thank you again for hosting this, and look forward to working with you and your colleagues as we advance this forward.
Thank you, Director. And then last but certainly not least, we've been joined by our Columbus City Attorney, Zack Klein.
Well, thanks, Chair. It's good to see you, Chair Favor, and my friends and former colleagues of the Columbus City Council. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you this evening for an important discussion about policies that can help everyday Columbus residents improve the quality of their lives through stable, secure, and affordable housing. There's one particular piece of legislation on tonight that I know, Chair Favor, you and I have been talking about for some time, and one that I want to give particular attention to in my opening remarks that you've been gracious enough to allow me to share, and that's the renter's choice legislation. I certainly don't want to steal your thunder of what the explanation of what renter's choice is, but it's a modern approach to today's security deposit. The traditional approach is to sometimes write a check for the first month's rent, sometimes the last month's rent too. So you're putting your hard-earned money, that is hundreds, if sometimes thousands of dollars, tied up in a security deposit that's out of your pocket and not able to allow you to invest in your family. The renter's choice legislation is a modern day approach that is an insurance product where, based on the amount that your monthly rent is, it's proportional of the monthly payment you'll pay, as little as a couple bucks a month for a couple $100 a month apartment. So we're talking about significant savings for families to be able to transition into housing. And I think that's important to note for two reasons. One is probably the most obvious, that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, that many families are struggling. They've lost job, they've lost income, they've lost wages, and trying to come, especially in the face of having to move, or in the unfortunate and all too often case we're seeing in our community, being evicted, having to come up with several $100s, sometimes thousands of dollars for a security deposit in order to move into additional secure and stable housing is sometimes such a high hurdle that many families cannot do it, and they end up homeless. They end up in the community shelter board system just because they don't have that barrier to entry through a security deposit. So paying as little as $5 or $6 or $7 a month gives that family the flexibility to be able to transition into other housing depending on what their unique circumstances are. In Columbus, and by talking and presenting this legislation through your leadership, Chair Favor, and the leadership of Columbus City Council, is joining the myriad of cities around the country that are dealing with this issue and taking up the modern approach to the security deposit by discussing renter's choice. The second one is one that we unfortunately have a unique perspective of in the city attorney's office, and that is domestic violence. And sometimes women who are trying to escape their abusers often don't have the money or access to the bank accounts that are necessary to come up with the security deposit in a traditional form. So having something like renter's choice, where only a couple dollars a month, a family, a woman, typically a woman victim, and their children, are able to escape their abusers and get into safe, affordable housing, can be critical to save that family's lives, to allow them to be in a stable place, a safe environment for the guardian or the parent to raise their children. That's one that's often not talked about, but it is a real solution of how renter's choice can affect victims of domestic violence. So thank you so much for allowing me to be on tonight, and thank you for your leadership in shepherding through these three important pieces of legislation that puts the city of Columbus on solid footing to help all residents deal with affordable, quality, and safe and secure housing.
Thank you, City Attorney Zack Klein. So now we'll go ahead and get into the three pieces of legislation that's currently under consideration. I want to start by stating that I have three primary goals for housing in our community. They are to ensure every Columbus resident has safe, sanitary, affordable housing, eliminating evictions for non-payment of rent, and to foster opportunities for home ownership and wealth building. The policies we will discuss tonight are in alignment with these goals. The first piece I'd like to discuss is source of income discrimination. Source of income discrimination is when a landlord refuses to rent a unit to a prospective tenant based on their source of income. Some applicants have vouchers to assist with paying rent who are disabled, are veterans, or are low income. Other sources of income could include child support or alimony payments. Currently, property owners may advertise rentals with no housing choice vouchers or no Section 8 or similar statements, or when asked, say they don't rent to housing choice voucher holders. Source of income protection will mean including a source of income as a protected class in fair housing law. At this time, I'd like to introduce Amy Klaben and Rachel Kleit with the Building Welcoming Communities to build on what I've begun to lay out on this topic. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Chairwoman Favor, thank you so much. And thank you to all of the committee members. We appreciate your being inviting us to be with you tonight so we can talk about this very important issue. Rachel and I have been volunteering with Building Welcoming Communities and many volunteers in the community for a while as we seek to open doors to opportunity in our community. Rental support, including vouchers, provides government or private assistance to low-income households so that they may afford rental units of their choice. These programs are important because they allow participating families freedom of choice in where they live and make it possible for lower-income families to find housing they can afford in low-poverty, resource-rich localities if that's what they want. And it does open the door to more affordable housing in our community in areas that currently do not have affordable housing. So Rachel's going to provide some background about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and then I'll be back to talk about what other cities and states are doing on this issue around the country. Rachel?
Thanks, Amy. So as Councilwoman Favor mentioned, source of income protections prevent landlords from refusing rent based on the type of income that they use to pay it. And as Councilman Favor said, these can be housing vouchers, it could be alimony, it could be a privately funded voucher, like the city of Bexley has. And the people who benefit from this are, say, veterans, folks that have SSI, and families. So veterans are a protected class in the fair housing law, but they're not protected based upon using a voucher, a FASH voucher, that is usually from a housing authority. So they could still be denied housing. The program works with the rent. The tenant pays 30% of their income for rent, and the rest of that rent, up to a fair market amount or a payment standard, is paid by the housing authority. The landlord has to go through an inspection and sign a couple documents. And the benefit is that the resident's income, because it's protected by the voucher, their payments are protected by the voucher. If that resident were to lose their job or have a change in their income level, they would still be able to pay their rent. And so for many landlords, it's actually a very stable way of making sure that they do get their rents. Right now, because of the payment standard and because we have the ability for landlords to refuse vouchers are fairly concentrated in the higher poverty areas of Columbus, where people are willing to take them. There are 12,000 voucher holders, 13,000 nearly, in Franklin County. 11,000 of those are in Columbus, and that's 87% of vouchers. So they're also not evenly distributed across our region. 50% are used by a family with a disabled head of household. And 81% of the vouchers that CMHA has are minority families, and 78% identify as non-Hispanic Black. Amy, why don't you continue?
Yes, and one thing I'll add to that is CMHA is increasing the payment standards in December of this year. So across the board, landlords will have a higher payment standard towards payment of rent. So Columbus is not the first community in the country to adopt source of income laws. 17 states and the District of Columbia have adopted these laws, along with 97 cities across the country, 7 in Ohio, and most recently Bexley, Cincinnati in 1980, and then 5 in the Cleveland area. Approximately 50% of voucher holders are now living in cities or states that have SOI protections. So when you hear comments about problems that might occur, know that this is being done throughout the country, and people are finding more access to housing when this barrier is removed. So who might oppose this type of protection? We thought it was important to lay this out from the start. When we talk about source of income protections, there are people that are NIMBYs. You hear that in all affordable housing contexts, not in my backyard. They just don't want those people here. And when you hear that type of phrase, it's oftentimes meaning that they don't want people who are low income, obviously, people who are African American. And that is not okay. Apartment owners, some do not want to participate in source of income law protections because they don't want to be forced to participate in a government program and deal with its bureaucracy. Some property owners are put off by the inspections. The inspections are important to make sure that people are living in decent housing. And but it's important to know that landlords can use their regular screening criteria and charge security deposits and regular rents. And as Rachel described, the rents are recession-proof. Somebody loses their job, the amount of voucher coverage for them increases to the payment standard. So the landlord is protected. So some people have been concerned about passing source of income protections because they're afraid that landlords will increase their rent. And we would hope that landlords in our community do not do that. Landlords increase their rent for a lot of reasons, and it's market related. If they could get more rent today, they already would be doing that. So when that threat is made, it is a threat. We know that there are good landlords in our community who accept vouchers, and in fact, recently this CMHA stated that 98% usage rate of their vouchers. So there's a lot of landlords who are participating, but there are a lot more that don't, and that's why this protection is needed. So passage of source of income protections are needed to create affordable housing in mixed income neighborhoods throughout Columbus, which is one of the goals of the city. This is how we create diverse and inclusive neighborhoods throughout the city, and we are working throughout the region. It's important that suburbs around Columbus also adopt this type of legislation, and that we have a protection countywide for everybody. So that's the overview, and thank you so much for inviting Rachel and I to provide this background, and we are available for questions.
Thank you, ladies. Before I start my round of questions, let me open the floor to my colleagues. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask of Ms. Klaben or Ms. Kleit. All right, I'll go ahead and hop on in there. So ladies, I think that we have engaged in a lot of conversations to discuss in preparation of tonight's hearing. And I don't for any second want to take for granted the administrative burden that could be associated with a landlord who does not currently participate in a government program like this. So can you speak to those potential administrative burdens that might be deemed onerous?
Do you want to talk about that, Amy, or do you want me to talk about why don't you go ahead?
I'll get started and then you join in. So one of the administrative burdens that we hear about is landlords do have to complete some paperwork. And there is a class that the Housing Authority provides. In fact, there's one coming up on Friday, I think at noon, free, and it'll be virtual. So new landlords can learn how to participate in the process. There are staff at the Housing Authority who are there to help. And there's a new organization called Renter Mentor that is available to work with landlords and help them through this process. Our response to this reason for not enacting the law is, when you have a business, there's a lot of rules you have to comply with. And a rule that is meant to protect people from discrimination is more important than a landlord's difficulty in participating in a new process. There are forms to fill out, that is true. And there's two, actually. And then an inspection. The inspection, right now, I believe it's a certification because of COVID. After that, the Housing Authority does come out and inspect. And they've recently hired a third-party company to assist them with that process. The Housing Authority has said is if there are significant issues, they are willing to talk about it and modify their procedures.
And one of the benefits of this administrative process is the improvement in the quality of the housing. Because some landlords actually improve their housing to be in the voucher program. Because otherwise they won't be able to fulfill their obligation. And research has shown that the closer you are in terms of location to a voucher, when it starts, the more positive income that has on neighboring rents because of the quality that's expected of the units.
Okay. So what about, and I probably should have level set and asked just before we got into the round of questions, what's currently protected under the Fair Housing Act?
Good question.
Lots of, that's a very good question.
Well, so if a tenant, a resident is currently watching and they believe that they have been discriminated in the housing process, what types of discriminations are currently protected?
Right.
I have that right here.
Yep.
It's race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, age, disability, familial status, or military status. Columbus has already increased this from the Federal Fair Housing Act, and we commend Columbus for its foresight in doing so.
Actually, it's the state of Ohio which has added ancestry and military status to the federally protected classes. And what qualifies as discrimination is when someone refuses to sell or rent housing to you, refuses to negotiate about the housing, refuses to make the housing available, sets different terms for you versus other people who might be looking at the housing, provides different services or facilities for different people, denying that the house is available for inspection or sale when it actually is available, persuading someone to sell or rent when they don't want to, denying access to a facility or service. And actually the most, in some parts of the country, the most frequent, there's an obligation. This is not only under the Fair Housing Act, it's also part of the ADA, American with Disabilities Act. And as a result, landlords are also obligated to make modifications to units based upon disability as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So in the conversations that we have had over the past month, one thing that we hear as a criticism of the policy is that we're really not going to get a lot of bang for our buck here because the reality is that all vouchers that are currently issued are in use, and the problem is that the city needs to build more housing. It's not that the landlords are creating barriers to housing. So, what would be your response to that?
Both and. Meaning that we definitely do need to have more affordable housing. And I think one of the things CMHA is doing is trying to provide housing that will accept vouchers. They're trying to get units that will do that because there is a lack of affordable housing in the area. At the same time, we have a lot of concerns around the location of housing, all the things that come with housing, like schools, neighborhood safety, amenities, access to grocery shopping, access to parks, and the choices that may be available or people may perceive to be available are limited because of current laws, because they know they can be turned away. And so if someone does want to try to live in a different area, it's very hard to know which landlords are going to accept their voucher for them to do that. So we do need more landlords who are willing to take vouchers, and we need more affordable housing. And we don't have enough vouchers. I mean, nationally, it's, 3/4 of the people nationally who qualify for housing vouchers don't get them because we don't fund them in this country. So this is really, we need affordable housing because we don't have enough subsidies. Mm-hmm. And we need to allow people to live where they want to live, which they can't do now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amy?
I'll add to that. A 2018 study said that fewer landlords reject vouchers in areas blocking voucher discrimination. So if there is a source of income loss, people have access to 77% more housing choice. And when there's no discrimination law, 35% of people have difficulty getting homes. So in our community, we believe that tenants should have a right to live throughout the city of Columbus. And it should not be up to a landlord to say, no, you can't live here because we don't like the type of money that you are bringing to us.
And what I think is very interesting about fair housing law is that low income is not a protected class. Income is not protected generally, right? So that's still something people can say, well, you can't afford this, right? Or there are other, so we're not saying that landlords can't use discretion in who they want to rent to. We just want them to be able to take this and not have it be an excuse not to rent.
And I think that is the key to this piece of legislation is this is just one thing that we're asking that to add to the list of fair housing prohibitions that a landlord can't use as criteria for rejecting someone to the unit. Now, if the unit does not meet the standards of the housing authority, that's a different conversation. And we're not trying to force a landlord to amend their property to meet said housing provisions. There's a difference there, right?
Yep, that's right.
That's right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Councilmember, that was actually my question exactly. Can you explain that difference? That so if they're told your unit is not up to the standard, they're probably given some amount of time to make that remedy and still rent to the possible renter, but they're not forced to do it. Is that what occurs at that juncture?
Yes, that is correct. The legislation is not seeking to force the landlord's hand in that way, so that they're amending their property to fit these laid out, the specified standards of the housing authority, right? This is simply saying that as a part of the applicant's process, that you cannot use their income as a way of saying whether or not they can rent the property. But on that note, I think it's important for us to once again not discount the reality of time is money for landlords. And Rachel, if you could speak to what that time frame could potentially look like at the point where an applicant is attempting to secure the unit, to lease the unit, and it's going through that process, and the housing authority is coming in and conducting its inspection.
So generally, it's a 3-month time window to use the voucher.
Okay.
And so if they don't use the voucher in that amount of time, sometimes housing, I actually do not know exactly what's going on with CMHA. Some housing authorities will renew vouchers over and over again for people. I don't know. I think Amy might know. Amy, are you there?
Yeah.
Do you know how much time there is? There's a 3-month window usually for renting. And if it's not used in that time, usually the voucher is not used and passed on to the next person. But I don't know what happens here.
So there's two issues. One is the tenant has 90 days to use their voucher. And what we're finding, because there's not enough landlords accepting vouchers and it's tight, that people are having a difficult time finding landlords who will accept vouchers. But the other issue I think you're asking about is, okay, so a tenant goes to a landlord to rent their unit. The landlord then has to get the inspection, get the paperwork signed. And if their unit passes the inspection, this could be a couple of week process, possibly up to 30 days. If the unit does not pass the inspection and the landlord chooses to make the corrections needed, then a second inspection will be required. And I think to the extent that this after the pandemic is a problem in terms of the timing, that is something to work with the housing authority on their systems with their new processes that they have. I don't know if this is an issue.
I mean, one thing that will happen is if the landlord is unwilling to make the changes, the person can continue using the voucher to look for housing. So that, I mean, hopefully we'll know that. Hopefully one knows that quickly.
Councilmember Remy?
Yes, to this exact point, one thing that, I'll make the statement, health, quality, safety inspections are really that's a low bar. And, these are things that we should expect our landlords to provide. Certainly broken windows, things along those lines are things that can be tagged, of course. But my concern is the length of time, because I know in talking with one of our partners, they said the inspection could take 2 weeks. They then could need a re-inspection. Tying up a landlord's property for that amount of time is an unreasonable expectation. I do understand, however, that there have been some cities that have done some time limitations on, like they have, if the inspection can't be done in such and such a time, that they potentially could still, meet the standard, but they may not, they could go ahead and rent the property. I know in this case, this particular partner, they actually hired their own inspector, and they're doing their inspections within 24 hours. That's something that, again, the city could look at. Whatever, they are reimbursed from HUD, to make themselves whole. I also found out there's no cost associated to the landlord for these inspections, so I did want to point that out as well. Yep. So just something to think about.
Thank you. Councilmember Tyson, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I did. I just really want to make sure that I'm thinking, and Amy will know what I'm going to say, but I do think that we have to make sure that when we're thinking about affordable housing, and I had this discussion earlier about the capital budget. So if we're looking at individuals who also may have vouchers, which is what this discussion is really about, but it's also the individuals that may not have vouchers that are working at places where they are making minimum wage or below. And so to think about someone who was making $10 an hour, to think about how they don't have a voucher. And we want them to be in safe, affordable housing. It's thinking too about what do we continue to do as a city to support the landlord who wants to make sure individuals who may be working in the jobs that I just mentioned be able to have affordable housing. Because as you just heard, we don't have enough vouchers, no matter what the situation is. And we have individuals who want to be in safe, affordable housing. And so as an amazing housing chair that you are, and certainly, and I've said this to Director Stevens, and we do have some programs that we need to add additional funding to, because individuals who are renting to individuals that are making $10 an hour or less, there is absolutely any area for any profit when you are renting to individuals that really do need to have a voucher. Unfortunately, we don't have enough vouchers. The federal government hasn't released enough vouchers. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in. So I'm just hopeful that I understand when we're talking about vouchers right now and people accepting vouchers, but no matter what, we don't have enough. And what are we going to do to help other people in this regard? Thank you.
You're absolutely on point, Councilmember Tyson. It's definitely something that we recognize as a gap and therefore an opportunity for us to think creatively around how we address that gap right there. I think it's important that for me to continue to think critically about how we create a revenue stream fund to continue the programs that we created in response to the pandemic over the summer. Because these problems are not going away. And right now, it does not appear to be another CARES Act package on the horizon that will lift some of this off of our shoulders. And so we've got to figure out a way to provide that security for landlords who have graciously participated in the programs over the summer and working with our housing partners and making them incentivizing their participation and working with people that might fall in the low income category. So that point is very much appreciated. Councilmember Dorans?
Yes, thank you, Chair Favor. I'm curious on this subject. I think anytime we're looking to sort of expand protected classes, which I think is an excellent and worthy thing for the city to be doing, especially in this instance in the housing conversation. Just curious from a enforcement regime. I remember being a young renter, and you see those Craigslist ads that says no Section 8 or no, you have to have X amount of income or whatever. Curious, obviously. So one, here's what the legislation does around enforcement. So if someone fails to do the right thing on that part. And then also, I know there's a lot of landlords out there that want to do the right thing. And especially if we make this kind of change, there's going to need to be some education efforts that we're going to need to undertake in order to do so. So I wanted to just sort of ask the question about, what does enforcement look like this if, a landlord fails to comply? What is sort of the response from us on that? And then two, what kind of educational sort of efforts do you sort of foresee with us to sort of try and work with the housing partners to make sure that folks do this the right way?
Absolutely. This is a great question. Thank you, Councilmember Dorans. And I'll tee up Director Stevens to talk a little bit further about our fair housing reporting agency and what that looks like. But it would essentially be a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Which means that our reporting agency, which is now, oh gosh, I'm going to forget I just forgot their name. Do you remember, Director Stevens?
I believe we had a contract with the Columbus Urban League on this.
Yeah,
but
that's what I think. It's the Urban League.
No, it's not the Columbus Urban League at the moment. No,
really?
My team will text me as I'm talking now.
Okay.
It's the realtists.
Yes, the realtists.
Oh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. So that it would be a violation that would fall under that parameter. But in our conversation, and we just missed Chair Brown, who chairs Department of Finance, in having a conversation with Director Lombardi last week. From his team, there has never been a fair housing violation for the city of Columbus. Now, I don't know how accurate that is because we do know that these problems exist. These problems exist in our community. And so my response to Councilmember Dorans' question is really in part to is in response to both of his questions, is that we have to bolster our educational efforts to not only educate our landlords, but also our residents, that these are the protections that are provided under the law. And if you have been discriminated against because you fall within these protected classes, then this is what you're supposed to do. And this is what can be in place to support you in that process. To that point, should these pieces of legislation pass in 2020, which I hope that they do, we are looking at an enforcement start of sometime in the spring of 2021, because once again, we do not want this to be punitive in any way. We want to take the educational part very seriously by partnering with professionals in the community that conduct these types of housing educational forums all the time, and that can work alongside our landlords and provide them with the support that they need, as well as educating our residents at the same time. Director Stevens, do you have anything additional you would add?
No, I think that summarized it well, Chair Favor. We're working for Fair Housing Partners, as well as I know I see Ben Horn from Legal Aid. They're also a partner in this and making sure that after the education, when we move to the enforcement side.
Great, great. Thank you so much. So with that, before we move on to the next piece of legislation, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge a report on housing programs just released October 2020 by the United States Senate Committee on the Budget, chaired by Senator Michael Enzi. In this report, it states in part, and I quote, "Congress should also explore ways to expand and incentivize the use of vouchers, which enjoyed bipartisan support at the Budget Committee's Housing Roundtable. Some say a key shortcoming of vouchers is landlords will not accept them. The reasons for refusal are varied, but one study found that 3 key factors for landlords are financial motivation, perception of tenants, and bureaucratic factors. To address these issues, Congress should explore the desirability and cost effectiveness of federal source of income protections. Reluctance to disturb the status quo or citing its complexity to fend off reforms will only perpetuate a flawed system." And so I thought it was important to include that acknowledgement from that recently released report to highlight the fact that on a federal level, this type of protection is being looked at as well. And so it's important for the city to continue to work alongside our housing providers and with our landlords and to ensure that we're supporting them in this process as well. And so with that, we will move on to the next ordinance, which is renter's choice. So we all know that moving can be a very expensive process, especially when we consider all of the upfront costs, like first and last month's rent payments and security deposits. Security deposits can be upwards of hundreds and thousands of dollars. This can be a huge financial burden for anyone, including low-income residents, college students, or young professionals looking to relocate. Low-cost insurance programs offer an opportunity to eliminate cash deposits, save renters significant money on upfront move-in costs, and provide property owners, landlords, the exact same protection they are given through cash deposits. The legislation would require landlords to provide the following options when it comes to security deposits: a lump sum deposit that is a lump sum deposit that is no more than half of 1 month's rent, or renter's insurance that offers low premiums as low as $5 a month to tenants instead of a lump sum payment. I'd like to introduce Jordan Stein with Rhino, one of the providers of security deposit insurance, to talk about their particular product and how it works for renters and property owners. Jordan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, members of Council, City Attorney Klein, Director Stevens, and community. It's an honor to be with you tonight, and I appreciate the work that Chairwoman Favor has led on this initiative. As Chairwoman Favor mentioned, I represent a company called Rhino. We offer an insurance program that replaces cash security deposits. We proudly serve renters and property owners in the state of Ohio, at this time, irrespective of any particular legislation. Basically, to give a bit of context here, which I believe is helpful as we discuss this. Obviously, as Chairwoman Favor mentioned, in the country and in Columbus more specifically, 49+% of Americans don't have $400 in savings to their name to pay for an emergency, let alone savings. That's according to the Federal Reserve in 2019. A Zillow study found that 40+% cite upfront moving costs, including the security deposit, as a definitive barrier to finding and maintaining stable housing. And what we have in Columbus during the historic and unprecedented economic challenge and uncertainty brought on by COVID-19, we have a situation where $480 million plus are currently locked up in cash security deposits. Our program, Rhino's program, or other programs like it for that matter, serve to keep property owners protected against damages and unpaid rent, as cash security deposits traditionally do and have done, while saving renters a tremendous amount in upfront moving costs. Basically, the way that the program works, and it's currently offered to thousands of renters based on property owners seeing and being savvy and seeing that it's a win-win solution, protects them and saves on upfront moving costs. The way it works is at move-in, a renter is given the choice to basically say, I can either put down a cash security deposit, the value of a month's rent, hypothetically say $1,000 for the sake of discussion, or I can utilize a low-cost insurance option in lieu of putting down that deposit. So in the case of an apartment that would rent for $1,000 a month, coming with $1,000 cash security deposit, that renter would pay approximately $5 a month for an insurance program, and obviously not have to put down that $1,000 upfront cash deposit, which frankly many renters lack, and that's a barrier to them obtaining stable housing. And many renters, frankly, have other things: healthcare costs, childcare costs, saving for an emergency that $1,000 or more, really, could be better utilized for. So the programs exist irrespective of legislation, but what we've seen, as you, council member and chairwoman Favor, are well aware of, and other members of council are aware of, is that a growing number of cities, as City Attorney Klein mentioned in his opening remarks, are going the route of renter's choice legislation, taking a proven, vetted option like these insurance programs that is already regulated by the Ohio State Insurance Department and state insurance departments across the country, and saying, let's take this vetted alternative that reduces upfront moving costs markedly, $480 million tied up in cash deposits in Columbus alone, and put that opportunity in front of every renter. What legislation here really comes down to is about equitable distribution of opportunity that is already in front of some. Very, very proud to share that the city of Atlanta, Georgia, joined the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, in recently passing renter's choice legislation. The Atlanta, Georgia City Council, about 2 weeks ago now, just passed this legislation unanimously with all 15 members on board. And Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who's been a national leader and housing advocate for housing affordability and accessibility, very promptly signed the measure into law. And just wanted to briefly share, from some recent comments that have been made publicly in the press, from advocates attesting to the value of renter's choice legislation. Diane Yentl, president and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, remarked on renter's choice, when you have such limited income, any extra expense, such as security deposits or requirements to pay the first and last month's rent up front, can be insurmountable hurdle to finding an apartment you can afford. Kevin Finn, president and CEO of Strategies to End Homelessness on Renter's Choice, remarked, on any given day, we have 200 families that have a first month's rent, but they still can't find an apartment. Having a more realistic arrangement for what the deposit looks like will make it much easier to get those households into an apartment. There are several more, which I'd be more than happy to share with any members or community members interested. But fundamentally, I'm happy to answer any questions. But our program really, 95 plus renters do not inflict excessive damage onto their apartments, and there's no reason to lock up $480 million when that money can be put back into renters' pockets and, frankly, put back into the greater Columbus economy. So I applaud you, Chairwoman Favor, as well as other members of council for moving forward on this legislative initiative to put an opportunity in front of all renters that is already in front of some and already regulated by the Ohio Insurance Department. And it would be my pleasure to answer any questions. So thank you for having me, and thank you for your leadership and advocacy here.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate you being here tonight. And you represent one company that offers this insurance product. How many other companies are out there that offers a similar product?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, that's a very good question. You know, the insurance as a replacement for cash security deposit field has been around in various forms for the better part of 2 decades. There are, you know, well over 15 companies that offer this sort of program. The vast bulk of which are obviously active across the country and in Ohio in particular. You know, that obviously kind of the experience in Cincinnati when this measure was passed into law, first in the nation, renter's choice legislation, you know, that obviously is the case there. And, you know, there's been many, you know, kind of items in the press sort of chronicling the number. But yes, that's absolutely the answer to your question.
So I'm very much interested in the unintended consequences because we have been talking about this type of product for a very long time. And so I have had concerns about those unintended consequences for our low-income residents, right? So let's talk about credit checks. How does that actually work? Does somebody have to have their a credit bureau check on the front end? Does it come in on the back end? How does the rate actually get set?
Sure. Happy to answer that question. And the way that our Rhino's program works, just as an example, an exemplar here, any renter is able to obtain a free, no obligation quote to understand what their monthly rate would be. Again, approximately, you know, $5 a month for an apartment renting for $1,000. A credit history is not a prerequisite for obtaining a policy. No credit history. That individual too, you know, our program writes policies for 100% of approved renters. So much like one of the other council members mentioned earlier, you know, programs like Rhino's are not interested in, you know, telling property owners how to do their jobs. You know, renters who are approved to live in properties 100% regardless of credit history. Our program does involve a soft credit check. It is an optional one. If a renter would rather not participate in that soft credit check, that's not an obstacle. It merely is designed to provide the lowest rate possible. But even so, rates differ just very marginally, as has been well chronicled through media coverage and scrutiny in the city of Cincinnati and elsewhere. And I also can't emphasize enough, I think it's a crucial point to make, Madam Chairwoman. Renter's choice legislation is fundamentally about choice and optionality. The insurance programs offered by companies like Rhino are a fantastic fit for a large number of renters. With that said, nobody is suggesting or dictating that it has to be the right choice for every renter. All that is being done by this legislation is putting, you know, in a time of historic and unprecedented economic challenge and uncertainty, putting an option that is a significant cost savings in front of every renter. If a renter believes that a traditional full cash deposit is the right route for that individual or family, nobody and nothing is saying that that is an impossibility. All that is being done is adding a tool to the toolbox of every renter. And I might reemphasize a tool that already exists for thousands of renters, making sure that everyone has that tool in their toolbox.
So let's talk about if a tenant up and leaves the apartment or the rental unit and breaks the lease. What happens in that scenario? The landlord would traditionally keep the security deposit that has been submitted by the tenant.
Sure. So our program, the way it works is from the moment that a policy is initiated, that property owner is covered for the term of that lease. Obviously, for the program to work, you know, property owners have every right to run a business and be protected and have a reasonable set of expectations. 1,000%. You know, we work with, you know, hundreds of thousands of property owners across the country. From a renter perspective, if in your example a renter leaves, our program should be thought of as not some excess additional financial obligation for the renter, but a replacement for a cash deposit. So let's just remember that $1,000, you know, example that we've been using for discussion purposes is not in existence. So that property owner would then make a claim for, unpaid rent in the amount of $1,000. And then that is sort of the equivalent of what that former cash security deposit would be. So I think that's a helpful framing that folks in, Atlanta, in council, in the mayor's office in Cincinnati, and in other places in Philadelphia, which is their council is taking up a measure, almost identically. A replacement for that full cash deposit. So the property owner is protected from the moment the policy is initiated, and the value coverage equivalent, is the same as that cash deposit. And I think that, your office and council, I think is, frankly, doing the responsible thing from a consumer protection standpoint, ensuring that coverage is the same amount. It is that one-to-one replacement. And I think that's, credit to your research and vetting process.
So what if on the back end, if the damage to the unit that a tenant has made is greater than the security deposit? What happens?
Sure. So the answer to your question is the exact same thing as would happen under normal circumstances. And what I mean by that is not anything crazy. All I mean by that is, under traditional convention, let's just use our discussion purposes example of that $1,000 cash deposit. Let's just say there's excessive damage to a unit or excessive unpaid rent to a unit beyond the quantity of that cash deposit that is in escrow account. The security deposit replacement insurance is just that, is a replacement and an alternative method of fulfilling that deposit. So whatever procedures and eventualities and actions and recourse that renter and property owner have once a security deposit is exhausted in a cash format, nothing is changing. And I think your question is an excellent one, because I think it really helps us flesh out the point that, all we are doing here is offering a financial alternative that is a lower cost option for the security deposit. Nothing about the back end and once that policy coverage or cash amount is exhausted, the future events that may or may not unfold are unchanged. Existing regulation policy that governs the city of Columbus, the state of Ohio, prevails and exists.
Okay. I have a whole host of questions, but let me allow my colleagues to hop in there if they have any questions they would like to ask Jordan. Councilmember Dorans?
Thank you, Chair Favor. Jordan, I think one of the things I've heard from certainly folks in the landlord community is that, hey, anytime there's something new, they're curious how this impacts sort of their timeline. And yeah, I think a couple of the questions that Chair Favor asked about sort of the process of, hey, if there needs to be a claim that's made, can you talk a little bit more about what kind of a reasonable timeline a landlord could expect if there needed to be a claim that was made on the policy?
Sure. Councilmember Dorans, thank you for the question. To answer your question, our program, I can't emphasize enough, you have folks that are, owners, property owners in Ohio who own, and manage, thousands of units, and people across the country who manage hundreds of thousands, but also folks who manage 2, 3, 4 units. We work with them all, and the process is no different. Our claims process is very straightforward. We have a very, kind of user-friendly portal. An owner can make a claim, property owner can make a claim at any time for damages or unpaid rent. All that is required is a basic level of substantiation. So for excessive damage, that would just be, an individual, for example, not making any assumptions about anyone, punches a hole through a wall, a photograph of that hole, it's a claim, it's paid out, within, generally speaking, 24 to 48 hours. Unpaid rent would basically be, a photograph of a ledger, kind of showing unpaid rent and arrears in that way. And basically, I can't emphasize enough, our program has to work for property owners. Our program is offered in, over 1 million homes across the country. And as Chairwoman Favor mentioned, we are one such provider of this form of insurance. The substantiation factor, I think also it's important to note, that adds a level of transparency to the equation. Fundamentally, renters are then able to see that. So, every property owner has every right to be paid out for excessive damage and unpaid rent. all we're just looking to do is monitor and make sure that, this is, excessive damage, and then 24 to 48 hours paid out. So pretty simple process. And, we'd be more than happy to speak with any property owners who would like to kind of dive deeper into their council member. If offline that's of interest, please feel free to reach out. Councilmember Favor's office, knows how to get in touch with me.
Thank you, Jordan. And I think it's important to note as well that a sort of existing landlord-tenant law also already requires the landlord to provide documentation to their tenant of, a withholding of the security deposit for, say, a repair of a wall. That you need to show receipts or show, evidence that you hired someone to take care of whatever, repair that needed to be made because of that. So it sounds like that lines up very, very well with sort of the system that most companies, and certainly yours, has in place for being able to provide that sort of documentation of the reason to make the claim.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm glad you said that, Councilmember Dorans, because I think fundamentally this just further gets at this idea of one-to-one replacement. The idea that all that is being stipulated here is, property owners, nobody, at least I shouldn't say nobody, certainly not myself, is arguing that anyone is not entitled to be protected against damages and unpaid rent. Full stop. This is just simply saying there's, as City Attorney Klein, I think, articulated very well in his opening remarks, there's another way to get to that same endpoint that happens to be an option to renters that saves them a whole bunch of money. And again, no renter has to use the program, but it's an option that is really valuable, put in front of everyone as a choice.
Thank you, Jordan.
Councilmember Remy.
Thank you, Chair Favor. So you don't need to be legislated to be here. Do you have anybody in Columbus right now that are policyholders?
We absolutely do, both in Columbus and in Cincinnati and in other cities in Ohio. Absolutely, yes.
What type of claims experience do you have overall? So like you look at your 1 million+ households and that sort of thing. What is the percentage where you see claims out of that broad, number?
Yeah, absolutely. Nationally, and generally speaking, these statistics are mirrored, kind of in Columbus and frankly, cities, states everywhere. The vast bulk of renters pay their rent and do not, destroy units. I think, I mean, we have seen numbers, kind of in the mid to high 90s as far as that performance. I hesitate to, stipulate that is the case for a particular city. I want to just be clear about that. I'd be more than happy to do that research and get back to you, Councilmember Remy. But again, I think your point further gets, I shouldn't say your point, your question further gets at the fact that, again, we've got almost $500 million sitting in escrow. And if we look at that percentage and that ratio, the fact that there is a way to protect against these things in a way that, gives renters that upfront cost savings, it's certainly a factor here in why, we've seen legislators and mayors across the country, sort of see this as a solution that's a win-win.
I appreciate Councilmember Doran's question earlier about the process. But I do, as a realtor, a lot of us are apprehensive about home warranties. We kind of tell our clients about them with a grain of salt, that they're always looking for ways to deny claims. Do you deny claims? I mean, is that again, coming from that background, we're used to like defending our clients for that sort of thing. I'm a landlord. I want to make sure that I'm going to get paid out if it's a true claim.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. And I think the positive, and I shouldn't even say the positive, the reality is that, there's a lot of myths, kind of about, I shouldn't say myths, there's a lot of assumptions and visions about when we hear the word insurance. We think of adjusters and visits and phone calls and all that. This is not that. Our program and programs like it are very simple. 100% of claims that are legitimate and in line with the scope of a lease and what excessive damages and unpaid rent would cover as per a lease agreement are covered. So, that substantiation, if there's a wall that's destroyed and there's, kind of just a photo substantiating that, then that's paid out. I think, there are not situations where that's happening.
Okay, thank you, Chair. You had mentioned something early on. I just want to make sure it's clear to me. the legislation states that there is a cap on the deposit if they choose to ask for a deposit. I thought I heard you say half of 1 month's rent.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. I apologize. So right now it's a lump sum deposit that is no more than half of 1 month's rent, or renter's insurance that offers a low premium.
Okay. And certainly appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Director Stevens, did you have any questions you'd like to ask at this time?
No, thank you. I appreciate it, though.
Jordan, just another follow-up question. So the tenant is locked into the monthly premium for the entire life of the tenancy. So if that's 1 year or 10 years, that's how long the insurance would last, correct? So does that mean that in that instance where, let's say the security deposit is $1,000, but they're paying for several years, which means that they could potentially be paying more than what the actual security deposit would be if they paid up front. So what is a response to those who see this as really not helping people who are already struggling financially and could potentially be out of more money in the long run?
Sure, Councilmember, that's a very good question, and one that has come up in Atlanta and Cincinnati and other places, and we'd be very happy to answer it. So, number one, I think the important thing to remember, just a slight correction. A renter is not locked into a policy for the duration of their tenancy. Policies run with the term of a lease. So at the renewal point, let's say you sign a 1-year lease as a renter, you are renewing that lease, you have the option to renew a policy, or if you prefer to put down a cash deposit, you can do that. The second thing is, 2 points I would make. Number one of the largest benefits and one of the largest reasons that the conversion rate when folks are given the choice to opt into programs like ours is so high is that the upfront cost is just a barrier for so many. There are many folks, to use our $1,000 example for discussion purposes, they just lack that $1,000. They may be able to afford monthly rent, so it breaks down that barrier. And in the course of a year, they're paying, roughly $60 for the insurance program. The second thing I'll say is, let's just use that $1,000 for an example. Using the prices that we've seen, in Ohio and Cincinnati for renters who are in Columbus for using programs like ours, to be at that point where they are, quote unquote, have exhausted that cash deposit amount, assuming that $1,000 example, the renter would have to be in that same property for something like 17 years. So that's one element to it. The other element to it, is that I can't emphasize enough that it is the renter's choice and prerogative to opt into these programs. So if they feel that, approximately $5 a month, again, can get that free, no obligation quote, is the right choice for me for this year or this lease term, great. Nobody's shoving the option down their throat. So our belief, and I think the belief of, folks like Mayor Bottoms in Atlanta and folks like, the leaders in Cincinnati and Philadelphia has really been that, this is an option to put in front of every renter, and, $5 a month approximately for that $1,000 apartment, be about 17 years before someone's at that point. But yet again, that is their option. If in year 3 they decide they'd like to change course, nobody and nothing is telling them that that's an impossibility.
So help me really reconcile that there, because let's say that the tenant does not opt to renew the lease after the year, all right, and they've been paying $5 a month, which essentially means they've paid $60 for an insurance policy, nowhere near the $1,000 actual security deposit. At that point, what happens to the policy, the premium?
So our program offers a discount to folks who renew. Renewal is not a requirement. The renter and tenant, can notify our program, that renter is either moving out of the unit or choosing to not renew and come to an alternative arrangement with the property owner. But again, that's, I as I said, it functions as a replacement for the cash deposit. So, $60 will go down slightly in year 2. But yes, it is the renter's option if they would choose to opt out, if they, feel that they'd rather go the route, let's just say, for example, not saying this is the case in any particular individual or family circumstance, but let's just say, economic circumstances change, we have a bit more income in savings. We'd like to, no longer go the route of an insurance program, put down the $1,000 cash deposit. Nobody's telling them that that's an impossibility.
And so does the tenant owe the balance of what's left from the cash security deposit if they opt to not renew?
I apologize, Councilmember. I'm not quite understanding your question. You're suggesting
Yeah, so I think what a lot of people are really not understanding is that if someone only pays $5 a month, and that only gets them to $60 in the year, they do not opt to renew the lease with the landlord, there is a significant amount that has failed to be satisfied. And so what happens to that outstanding balance, if you will? Balance is not the right word to use.
Yes. So I think it's crucial to understand there's a bit of a misconception there, council member. An insurance program is not installment payments. This is not a situation where renters are, let's just continue just again for discussion purposes using the $1,000 example. Renters are not gradually scaling up to $1,000. It is an insurance program that approximately $5 a month is providing $1,000 worth of coverage, right? So that is it's completely incorrect for anyone to suggest or assume that, it is an installment program laddering up. Okay, we'll eventually be at $1,000 and be done. No, that would be an installment program. This is an insurance program providing $1,000 worth of coverage to the property owner against damages and unpaid rent.
Thank you. I think it's important for us to continue to clarify how it actually works. And then my last question, I promise, is there a requirement that a customer of yours, and I know that you can't speak for other providers on the market, that one would have to have access to a credit card or a debit card in order to access the coverage?
No, I appreciate the question, and we've addressed this concern with your colleagues in Cincinnati as well as your colleagues in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and other folks. The answer is no. We accept a variety of payment methods. Credit cards, debit cards. We have customers, kind of partners that use our programs that have frankly paid with literal, I almost said brick and mortar, paper money, dollar bills, which is perfectly acceptable. There's no, we make it work with folks. There's no barrier from a, underbanked perspective or a financial resources perspective. That's, we believe, if we're writing policies for 100% of approved renters, we need to be able to accept payments that are workable for 100% of renters.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, and I appreciate your time, Jordan, this evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The next piece of legislation we will consider is the rental receipt. This code amendment would require landlords to provide tenants with a signed receipt for the security deposit and all rental payments. Over the past few months, we have been hearing from our partners and advocates at eviction court about tenants who were unable to prove that they, in fact, pay their rent. We know that many of our low-income residents don't always have bank accounts or an electronic way of tracking cash payments or money orders, which also extends to the question that I just previously asked Jordan around the renter's insurance. But I believe this legislation will assist those in those efforts. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Ben Horn with the Legal Aid Society of Columbus to speak about legal aid's experience at eviction court and how this piece of legislation could potentially impact tenants. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman Favor. I really appreciate your leadership on bringing this legislation forward, as well as the other pieces of legislation that we've been discussing tonight. It's heartening, it's exciting as a tenant advocate to see a city council so engaged in trying to make things better for Columbus tenants. This piece of legislation excites me because it really helps the poorest of the poor. It helps the most desperate tenants that we encounter in Columbus. Just as Jordan talked about, the vast bulk of tenants leave their properties, they pay their rent, they leave their properties in good shape. The vast bulk of landlords give a receipt, or if it's an electronic sort of payment, there's some sort of acknowledgement that it was paid. However, there is a certain lower strata, perhaps, of landlord who they do not give receipts, and this is their policy, and they use it as a tactic to take an unfair advantage over their tenants. In eviction court itself, it can be frustrating when we have a dispute as to whether or not the rent was paid. The tenant says it was, landlord says it was not. There's no rental receipts. The landlord openly says, I don't give receipts, that's just my policy. Now, with this legislation, I think there'll be a response that it's your duty to give receipts. You need to start taking this very basic bookkeeping measure. So it will help at eviction court in that way. But as I thought about this, I think that it will really help in a way that we see before it even gets to eviction court. And I'd like to share a story that reflects this situation. I was talking to a group of tenants in South Linden, and one particular tenant, she and her children were living in half of a duplex. The furnace was not working. It was cold weather, and the tenant was basically said, "Yes, I'm heating with the oven. I gather with the kids at night, and we put up, we have blankets, and we do the best we can." And being a lawyer, I said, "Well, gosh, you should exercise your rights. You should, tell them about this in writing. You should put your rent in escrow. You should call code enforcement." And she looked at me as if I was the most naive person she'd ever met. And she said, "Ben, if I do any of that, I'm going to have to leave." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because he'll evict me for non-payment of rent. And he's told me that." And I said, "Well, are you paying your rent?" And she said, "Yes, I'm paying my rent, but it's always in cash. He only accepts cash, and he doesn't provide receipts." And we encounter this from time to time, and it really puts the tenants behind the 8 ball because they are in constant fear that if I speak up, if I try to better my living situation by calling code or insisting on repairs or exercising my right to escrow my rent, I'm going to become homeless. So this is a tactic that we've seen landlords use, and it has a chilling effect on tenants requesting basic repairs that will keep them and their families safe. So, like I said, this is not the sort of legislation that I think most people would even think is necessary. You go to the store and you buy a bag of chips and you get a receipt. Almost any transaction you make where you're paying something, you get a receipt. But unfortunately, there is no right. A tenant does not have a right to receipt in the Ohio Revised Code, and so this legislation will fill a void in the law. It will help tenants. It will help remove that ability to intimidate tenants and cause them to not make complaints. So I thank you, Chairwoman Favor, for recognizing the need for this, and to all of you at City Council for considering this legislation. it will help tenants that need help more than any others. It's my pleasure to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ben. We truly appreciate the work that you and your colleagues at the Legal Aid Society of Columbus continue to provide for our residents in Columbus. I love that you acknowledge the fact that there is no right to a receipt in the state of Ohio. And I cannot think of any other large purchase that we make, whether it's buying a TV or anything that's in the hundreds of dollars, right? Where you are not provided some form of a receipt, an acknowledgement that you have the consideration that you have provided said money to an entity in order to receive something back. And so it's I'm not going to lie, it is rather hard for me to understand the practicality around why this piece of legislation could be burdensome for a landlord. Ben, do you have in your conversations with, I know that you can speak definitely to what the burdens have been like for residents, but have you had any conversations with folks who provide housing that could further elaborate on that?
Quite honestly, Chairwoman Favor, I have never really heard any adequate explanation by landlords who don't provide receipts as to how it's a burden. I just think that it's something that they know they can do, they can get away with, and they can use it to their advantage. It's a nefarious tactic, and I'd be pleased if this legislation were to address that situation, and because it will impact clients, I think, in a positive way, not only at eviction court, but further down the line. It will take away. It'll take away a tool of intimidation.
One of the pieces of feedback that I received indicates that the legislation could potentially disincentivize drop boxes or other tools that landlords and tenants currently use to allow payment outside of normal business hours. Or it could potentially create an incentive for tenants to stop payment on electronic funds of transfers after they submitted without an ability by the landlord to know that the funds have actually cleared. Do you see this legislation as it's currently written doing either of those?
No, I mean, I think that there's, as you mentioned, there's various ways of paying the rent, and certainly with a Dropbox payment, that doesn't mean that the landlord can't provide a receipt. Same with an electronic payment. I mean, just because it's not money being handed and a receipt being given doesn't mean that the receipt can't come later on. So I don't see that as a hurdle at all.
What are we missing, Mr. Horn, that we haven't discussed already around the specific? We've called this just common sense housing legislation, but we definitely want to make sure we fully appreciate any of those obstacles we haven't discussed already.
Quite honestly, Chairwoman Favor, I cannot think of any obstacles. This does seem like a very basic bookkeeping. It's basic. I mean, a landlord is running a business. This is not a difficult ask. It's not.
Thank you, Ben. I truly appreciate your time this evening. Now we will move into the public testimony portion of our hearing. I will call on each speaker who will be unmuted and you will be provided with 3 minutes to speak. So the first person up we have is Carly Booz. Carly, the floor is yours.
Carly Booth.
Did we lose her?
She is listed and has been unmuted, but I'm not getting feedback from her.
Okay.
We can move to the next one, and if you'd like to check back, certainly keep her online.
I think we might have her now. Carly?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Thank you for being here. Please provide your name and any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Carly Booz, and I'm the Executive Director at the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. We want to thank Council for advancing this timely and necessary package and for taking the time to find a fair balance between the rights of tenants and the landlords that serve them. Taken together, these 3 proposals are going to set Columbus on a new trajectory towards a more equitable place, one that values all of the members of our community. This represents the first step towards ensuring that each of us is in control of our own lives and that our hard work and skills is what's defining our success, not the zip codes that we were born into. I want to speak to each of these legislative proposals individually, and in the interest of time, I'm going to start with the source of income. We are particularly thankful for this piece of legislation and having the opportunity to discuss it. This stands to be the single most salient step we have ever taken as a community to create fairness and reverse the anachronistic policies that further division in our community. To help illustrate why this is so critical, let me share a few relevant facts. So first, despite being America's city, Columbus is in the top quarter of most racially segregated communities. Economic segregation is even worse. Where we weigh in, it's the 8th most segregated city in the country. For low-income households, these pockets of poverty are nearly impossible to escape. Despite having a guaranteed rent payment, 3 out of 5 Columbus voucher holders still live in a neighborhood where the poverty rate exceeds 10%. We know that kids growing up in these concentrated areas of poverty have lower academic performance, lower college attendance rates, lower lifetime earnings, and are more likely to become single parents and have interaction with the criminal justice system. A key driver in this skewed opportunity landscape is the refusal of property owners to recognize non-traditional forms of income, particularly those kinds of payments that are most commonly used by women, mothers, and people of color, like child support and housing vouchers. Paradoxically, these are some of the same income streams that are the most reliable and recession-proof, making them especially valuable now during the pandemic. And I think most relevantly, research shows that source of income laws can reverse this phenomenon, and it can set our families on a path towards self-sufficiency and stability and growth. One HUD study found that in 5-tract cities, voucher denial rates, where there were no source of income laws, topped the charts at 78%. 78% of voucher holders were denied where there was no protection. But in cities that do have these source of income laws, those rates plummeted down to as low as 15%. I also want to highlight the power of this tool, not just to propel families forward, but to also bolster our entire region's economic security. Source of income protections are a versatile economic development tool, especially in Franklin County, where we have a dangerous mismatch between where our affordable housing is sited and where our upwardly mobile jobs are located.
Charlie, you can finish your statement.
Thank you, ma'am. I just want to finish by saying that this geographic puzzle is bad for our businesses that are trapped in neighborhoods without meaningful job access, and it perpetuates cycles of poverty. Voucher utilization can break these chains and help workers and employers build the connections that they both need to succeed. Again, I want to thank you for bringing this initiative to Columbus and for all of the council members' consideration in supporting this landmark initiative. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you, Carly. Can you restate that figure that you just acknowledged, the 78% figure and 15%?
Correct. HUD researchers studied 5 cities, 3 of them did not have voucher protections, and the denial rate for HUD vouchers in those cities ranged between 67 and 78%, 78 being the highest side. In the 2 cities that did have voucher protections, it was between 30% and 15%, which the research report called a significant diminishment of that discrimination.
Well, thank you, Carly, for that testimony and for your time this evening. Up next, we have Jillian Olinger. Please state your name and any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, good evening. My name is Jillian Olinger, and I am the Chief Mission Officer at YWCA Columbus. As an organization, housing is in our DNA, and today we provide both permanent supportive housing for women and emergency shelter for families experiencing homelessness. Our work has become even more critical in this time. Evictions and increased landlord scrutiny have only exacerbated an existing affordable housing crisis. And now the COVID-19 pandemic adds another layer of uncertainty. A recent analysis of a dozen large cities found that neighborhoods at higher risk of complications from COVID have also seen the highest filings of evictions over the last 6 months. Columbus is on that list. Every day, working with clients at our shelter, we hear stories of exploitation of vulnerable families. I will focus my remarks on the experiences of source of income discrimination and affordability hurdles. One example is the increase in fees and even being considered for an apartment. Some landlords are now requiring not only an application fee, but also a processing fee and a holding fee. The amount in fees alone can be an insurmountable barrier for families who may be experiencing income loss, especially in the time of a pandemic. For a 2-adult household applying for a 2-bedroom apartment, these fees can be as high as $445 simply to apply for the apartment. And this does not take into account the cost of the security deposit to move in, if approved. Our clients have also experienced discrimination based on partner funding. In our homeless system, different populations are linked to different service providers. For example, some agencies prioritize serving families, others transitional age youth, and so on. And we have become aware that landlords will discriminate based on who different populations of renters are linked with, essentially gaming the system based on which agencies are able to offer the longest rental assistance. Our community has rallied around the issue of evictions. In just a few short years, we've made progress in leveling the playing field between tenants and landlords and providing more resources to tenants facing a challenging housing market. But we know there is more to do. The housing legislative package put forth by Councilmember Favor is the next logical step in this process. These are common sense solutions to fix a broken housing market and provide relief and protections to both tenants and landlords. If as a community we are committed to providing opportunity for all and advancing regional equity, we must pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. And just to highlight a couple notes that you pointed out, we talked a lot this evening, obviously, about the security deposit, but we failed to acknowledge the reality of application fees. And so I know that you mentioned a figure of $445. Do you have an idea of what the average would be?
That was based on a 2-adult household, so that's application fees are for each adult, a holding fee based on a rent of $750, so half the first month's rent. But I don't know specifically an average. I could check with staff and see if we could get a figure for that.
No, and it just truly captures some of the thinking around why a progressive policy like renter's choice could be definitely helpful for people who are looking or by necessity have to find a new place to live. And are those application fees refundable?
They are not. They are not. The holding fee would apply to your move-in, but holding and processing an application are not refundable.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your testimony this evening. Up next, we have Michelle Heritage. Please state your name and any organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Councilmember Favor. I'm Michelle Heritage with Community Shelter Board. And on behalf of the 14,000 people in Columbus who will use Community Shelter Board's network of services this year, I'm pleased to speak in favor of tonight's proposed housing legislation. Protecting renters from source of income discrimination is an important step towards making sure people who are homeless can get back on their feet. Community Shelter Board will spend $3 million this year on move-in rental assistance to help people get out of shelter and into their own apartments. When property owners refuse these payments because they come from a third party, guess what happens to that family? They remain stuck in a homeless shelter. People getting stuck in homeless shelters is bad for our entire community because it means beds don't turn over and shelters get overcrowded, and eventually shelters overflow into our streets. Not to mention what homelessness does to families and children in the first place. It destroys physical and mental health, causes depression and anxiety, and kids get behind in school and their development lags. Upfront move-in costs are another significant barrier for very poor renters. Allowing people to opt for renter's choice instead of a large lump sum security deposit is a great solution. As the housing market has become hotter, property owners ask us for double security deposits for people who they deem as second chance renters. Oftentimes, this is upwards of $2,000. That's a lot of money to save while working minimum wage. This financial barrier keeps people homeless. When we pay it on someone's behalf, it eats up our rental assistance budget, and then we don't have money left to support the renter during their first couple of months back on their feet when they're still vulnerable. Finally, rent receipts are a common sense approach and a basic business practice in every other sector, so we welcome this protection for some of our most vulnerable Columbus citizens who are unbanked and using cash. Otherwise, we disadvantage those who are already most disadvantaged among us. Thank you for your strong leadership, which forges a path towards everyone in our community having a place to call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for your comments this evening. In your experience, why are people refusing to work with third parties?
Many times we find that it could have to do with they don't want to have the apartment inspected. And again, as others have said, this is a very basic inspection. It's a habitability. We shouldn't really want any property on our market in our community that wouldn't be able to pass this kind of inspection. And so sometimes folks don't want to do that. In addition, I do believe it is used to discriminate against people who are very low income. I do believe that it reinforces discrimination. When 65 to 70% of the people experiencing homelessness in our community are African American or people of color, it doubles down on discrimination to not take these payments from a third-party source, and it then again keeps people in shelter for longer periods of time.
And Michelle, can you speak to the to whether or not it is a fact that there are housing voucher recipients who are currently in shelter who are unable to find housing at this point?
Absolutely. Our data actually shows that having a housing voucher means you will likely be in shelter for a longer period of time because it is so difficult to locate a landlord that is willing to take your voucher.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Jerry Valentine. Please state your name and any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
How you doing? Jerry Valentine. I am the founder and CEO of Renter Mentor. As a former employee of 4 years of the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority, I was able to work directly with Columbus residents with housing choice vouchers and had a chance to see how difficult it is for them to utilize them, and others receiving similar help through housing assistance programs to utilize the rental assistance in order to obtain safe and decent sanitary affordable housing. The affordable housing ecosystem is severely underserved by private landlords willing to accept rental subsidies from public and private rental assistance programs due to misconceptions and lack of program education. This has caused low to moderate income tenants to have a stressful 90-day housing search process of a limited inventory of private market housing to choose from, making them vulnerable and subjective to housing scams, predatory landlords, and even worse, failure to utilize the rental assistance and enter homelessness. After seeing hundreds of vouchers expire each year because of the lack of choice, I believe it is time for the city to adopt the current House legislative package. As the founder and CEO of Renter Mentor, I would like to make it known to all the property owners support you doing this work regarding the source of income discrimination legislation. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, and I appreciate your comments this evening. As someone who has had the experience working with the Housing Authority and now being the leader of an organization that seeks to fill that gap around education, what do you think are some ways that we can begin to combat the stereotypes that are associated around Section 8 recipients and voucher holders?
I think the first one is getting rid of the term Section 8. The program is called Housing Choice Voucher. It's been that since 1975, and the term in itself brings that stereotype of the program, of tenants not paying rent, not having skin in the game. And there is a true need for streamlining of what exactly those administrative organizations like the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority, what they really do, what those administrative process really are, what are some of the common mistakes or miseducation pieces. I think those need to be, put out in a more streamlined way through a diverse set of social media platforms, because homelessness and voucher users take all shapes and forms, and they're using all type of platforms. So diversification of how we're presenting the information to our residents and to our landlords is, to me, the number one way that we must do this. And having more advocates attending our civic and neighborhood associations. Those are when the big deals go down, and we must be there to educate the residents that are voting and speaking on the behalf of these new developments coming to place, these new renovations, in order to make sure that they know when a developer comes in, what the affordability is, what the tax credit incentives really mean, and how we can really embed the affordability component within those housing, those developments. I think is the social media, and then attendance in our neighborhood and civic associations are the top two things I believe will help educate and move education forward with these programs.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. That is helpful information, and thank you for your time this evening. Up next, we have Ana Maria Perales-Lang. Please state your name and any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I'm Ana Maria Perales-Lang. I am with Bell Harbor Management of Ohio. I am the director. I am the bad guy landlord that you all have been talking about. I find it very important to speak to this. I work with a lot of you all, different programs, providing second chances to people who not normally would be getting apartments. We work with the YWCA, Alliances, Children Alliance. I take away application fees, we drop deposits, we do what we have to do because we are a community. I wanted to address you because I think what you're trying to do is a very good thing, but there is a couple of things in which I find a little bit of a problem with. The renter's choice, I think that's, when I first heard about it, I wasn't a fan. I've listened to what you had to say and everything, and I got to tell you, it sounds like a good idea. However, as a landlord, my advice would be, no offense to the guy who was speaking, who seems very nice, I would look to see the people that where it's actually being used and what kind of hiccups and problems they have, because a lot of the questions didn't get answered. It kind of went in circles. So I would, as you seem to be really going out of your way to get the facts. So that would be one suggestion. Like I said, I came in thinking our deposits are not that high. And there is the people that leave early because we do rent to some people that do tend to be people that go from one place to another because of addiction or whatever. So that is a problem. So some of the questions you asked were really good. So I just wanted to address that. I would check to see what, just do a little bit of work on regarding people that are using that and how's it been for real? because Cincinnati only started in 2020, and with the COVID, everything changed and went upside down. And the main reason I wanted to speak to you was the rental receipt. We've been given receipts from the beginning. We've always given receipts to people. We don't accept cash. How people still accept cash, I do not understand, and why they don't give receipt. That should be a law. And anybody who wouldn't give us receipts should be fined. That's one thing that you should do. If people do not wish to give receipts or refuse to, maybe you can put, maybe Rex. I'm sorry, I apologize. My husband's cooking, so sorry. Maybe you can give a fine to the people that violate this. And not all the landlords, but the landlords that are continuously making us all look bad. But the issue I had was this sentence that you wrote, whoever. This legislation will shift the burden of proof in the courts to landlords to prove the rent was not paid if they did not provide a receipt to the tenants. As you all stated at the beginning, the tenants, the residents, which I call them, are consumers. We are the business. In no business, if you're the consumer and they say they haven't been paid, does the burden shift to them? Whether you're the bank, the mortgage company, the utilities, if I say I paid you, I have to prove it. I have to show you the receipt, show you my money order, show you my check. So
No, you're fine, Miss Lang. And thank you. Let me first start off by saying that I'm not calling anybody bad landlords. We can't do our job if you all are not a part of the process. So thank you, number one, for working alongside some of our most vulnerable residents. The question I would have for you is how would one be able to prove that they have paid rent if they have not received a receipt from their landlord?
Turn it up. Okay. All right. So I thought about that because I wanted to come in with solutions and not just complaints. So in regards to cash, I really believe that they should take that off the table. They should say you have to be able to pay in a money order or whatever. It's just not good business, especially with the COVID. You shouldn't really be handling cash with people and all that. So what we do is we provide an invoice along with a newsletter that tells who's doing testings or whatever, and then an envelope, and they put it through the slot. If a person pays with money order, and Councilwoman, most of the people that we have do pay with money order because we have to fill it out for them. They have the stub. And what happens is if someone claims they paid, we put the account on hold and we give it 4 weeks, which is normally what it takes for the money order to trace. Okay, so that could show us who cashed it, because just because they bought it did not mean they gave it to us. Okay, so that could show it if it's cash, or if it's not cash, they will then issue a new one, and they usually take a fee off, which we always write it off. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, if they take off $20, we don't charge that $20 to the resident. We just take it off the rent, so that's zeroed out again. Okay, because we know it's not the resident's fault. If the money order got lost for whatever reason, maybe we threw it in the trash, and it's not cash, we're going to get another one. If it shows who cashed it, and if it's somebody who maybe stole it, we file a police report and we go ahead and eat that. Okay, we don't evict people, we put it on hold. Now, obviously the next rent is going to be due, and that rent has to be on time. And so while we're waiting, we sometimes will just carry over the balance. And I think that's fair. So when I hear that the burden belongs to us, that's the issue I have, because it should be like any other business. The burden is there, but we have to work with them. And I think that's where, I think maybe if you said, okay, you have to give them at least a month to prove it, then that would make sense, because that's plenty of time.
Right. And of course, we would more than likely, a month would have been passed because we would be at the point where the court is involved. So an eviction has already been filed.
Yeah, we couldn't even file till then. You know what I mean? Like, you could see there's ways, like, first of all, as a landlord, we don't like to go to eviction court. First of all, the person there from the legal place, they'll tell you we never lose because we do things right. Okay. And one of the things I find is the more time that you try to get the resident to get responsibility, get the pay stub. Sometimes we have to call for them whenever something like that happens because they don't speak the language. So then we put the account on hold. So, you know what I mean? So meanwhile, the resident, we're not going to court. We're just waiting for the tracer people. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time with the tracer, depending on where they bought it. But again, they still have to show that they bought it. and they still have, the burden still falls on them. Okay, if they, you know what I mean? If they expect me to do the work, that's not what they pay me for. If they come in and show me that they went, they called the money order place and everything, then we will be more than happy to work with them. You know?
Yes, I appreciate your testimony tonight. My team and I will likely be reaching out to you to continue this conversation, because I think that it's important for us to speak offline, and for me to interact with some landlords that I haven't had the occasion to work with in the past. So thank you for your testimony and your insight this evening. Up next, we have Peter Lohman. Mr. Lohman, please state your name and any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. My name is Peter Lohman. I live in Old Town East and own a property management company called RL Property Management, also located in Old Town East. We manage about 400 units located in Columbus, including several dozen with voucher holders, and we represent about 150 property owners. We work with many second chance tenants. We handle leasing, rent collection, and maintenance for our property owners. I personally am a licensed real estate broker, and in 2018, I sat on Ohio's Property Management Task Force, charged with updating property management regulation in the state to further protect the public. I personally am a strong advocate of fair housing and housing accessibility, and have taken steps within our management company to reduce the opportunity for unconscious bias to creep into our tenant screening process. Regarding the proposed legislation, for source of income, we think this is a great idea. We support this wholeheartedly, particularly with the ability for landlords to not be required to make CMHA mandated changes to their property if it does not pass inspection. I also wanted to give a shout out to Jerry with Renter Mentor, who gave his testimony earlier. He and I have had some really great discussions around this topic. On the rental receipt, we think it makes complete sense to mandate a receipt. In fact, we already do it. We also provide monthly statements to all residents showing a record of all their charges and payments. We would simply request that the legislation clarify that an email receipt would be acceptable if the tenant has an email on file. Most property management software does this automatically, even for cash payments, and there's very little burden. And also, if they were to make a payment through a Dropbox, as previously discussed, allowing that receipt to come during business hours would be helpful. Regarding the renter's choice legislation, I'm not as optimistic. So the goal here is to make safe and affordable housing within reach for more residents who may not have large cash reserves on hand. Awesome, totally support that goal. However, what is proposed here is not only radical and punitive, but will have the opposite of the intended effect. Let me say why. Security deposits are a tried and true method to protect the landlord from damage and unpaid utility bills and rent. If the tenant can pay in installments, what happens if they do not pay the rent and make the payments as agreed from the get-go? The landlord has to pay to evict and has no security deposit to offset the losses. Now, regarding the insurance companies, these deposit insurance companies are not a long-term solution. Their claims process is hostile and burdensome, and these companies go out of business all the time. We've tracked them for years because we've been keeping an eye on this market. Rhino, for example, who testified earlier, they were only founded in 2017. I've tracked 4 or 5 others that have come and gone in the last decade. Now you're asking landlords to navigate the paperwork and claims process for half a dozen different insurance companies, and who controls what these companies can charge tenants. By their very nature, these companies must be charging more to the tenants than they would otherwise pay because they have to turn a profit.
Thank you for your testimony tonight. So just a question for you, since you do have the opportunity to interface with so many different types of renters in our community. Does it not make a difference that it's not a mandate that a landlord has to only offer renters choice, so low cost insurance as a form of replacing cash security deposit, that there is a choice that if a tenant, that it's up to the tenant whether or not they choose to
Sure.
use the insurance process or not?
So just to clarify, if is the choice up to the tenant? So if we had a
Yes,
property for rent and a tenant came and they said, I'd like to use the security deposit solution.
that is correct.
Right. So basically the landlord then would have to accept whatever insurance company the tenant chose.
Well, yes, and those are the types of details and feedback that we're soliciting at this point in time. That the landlord has selected companies that he or she
Okay.
feels comfortable with, and offers those companies as an option, right? So
Okay.
it's not a mandate that you have to, as the tenant, go with, let's say, Rhino, since they testified tonight. That
Yeah.
you have a choice between Rhino and ABC Insurance Company, or to pay it outright.
Sure. Yeah, I think my concern with that is, so on the back end of the security deposit, the disposition, or dispo as it's called in the industry, there's legal protections in place for tenant security deposits at the state level. So for example,
Okay.
the landlord has to provide a statement within 30 days, etc. So if a landlord makes a claim against a company like Rhino, and then that claim exceeds the amount that was allocated, that insurance company is going to go after that tenant to pay the balance. And
Mhm.
in that situation, there's no protection in place for those tenants at the state level, in the same way that they would be protected against a landlord who was going after them for a balance on a security deposit. So that was another concern I have with these insurance companies.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate your testimony tonight, Mr. Lohman, and the team and I will likely be reaching out just to continue this conversation, because I think it's important insight as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Michelle Sims. Please state your name and any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Michelle Sims is not online with us any longer.
Thank you. Up next is Mitch Dominski, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
You got it right. Very good.
Awesome.
My name is Mitch Dominski. I am investor for the last 22 years. I'm broker owner of Solutions for Real Estate. We manage just over 500 units, representing about 150 owners. To address these 3 issues, when I go to an owner and I ask or go over the process of whether or not they want to take their property to Section 8, which we have probably 40 or 50, I have to go through, I have to have them weigh it out on the process of going through it, and give them the struggles that we have on working with a Section 8 type voucher. The time process, how long it takes to go through the Section 8 process. For example, we go Section 8, we have an approved tenant through our initial criteria. We wait 2 or 3 weeks for an inspection. It fails the inspection, or it does, which is, there's a lack of consistency and reasonable repairs on a lot of these inspections. Once it is approved, it might be 45 days before a tenant or an owner gets paid for this owner. In addition to that, if you do go Section 8, and Section 8 doesn't require you to have renter's insurance, which is an additional risk for the owner. It's not necessarily, I don't think an owner here would agree that owners don't have a problem who pays the rent. It's the hassle of getting the rent. For an example, we've been waiting $4,700 from Section 8 from July 15th that we have not been paid. So again, it's more about getting the rent. I think it's a great program, don't get me wrong. As far as 3 options for security deposit, I'm not a fan of the 6-month program. If they can't pay either insurance or the full amount, that really makes me nervous that someone over 6 months is going to pay it. Again, to Peter Lohman's, making a claim on renter's insurance or security deposit insurance, Mr. Stein said that they would cover damages and unpaid rent. What about water bills? What about neglect that someone left things out of hand, or this, it's kind of hard to send pictures of the smells that you have in some of these places if they have animals. So the verdict is still out on whether or not they pay their claims. Peter also did a good job on the third part. I agree with Ben Horn on getting a receipt. I think the verbiage needs to be cleaned up where it says cash only, or cash. It is not difficult to give receipts electronically, so no problem there. Lastly, I just want to say I'm going to throw my name in the hat to be called for any help on getting this through.
I apologize. I couldn't get my computer off mute. Thank you very much for your comments tonight. They're well received, and I hear you loud and clear when you talk about the lack of consistency in inspections, and not just what is being found through the inspection, but just the timeliness of the inspection. I am not being callous and the assessment of what this process could potentially look like, and how it could be burdensome for a property owner who does not currently interact with a third-party entity like the government in this instance. So thank you for that feedback, and you'll be hearing from us for sure. Up next, we have Ethan Goodman. Ethan, please state your name and any organization that you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Councilmember Ethan is no longer listed. My apologies.
No problem. Thank you. Rachel Winnig. Is Rachel still available?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for being here. Please state your name, any organization you might represent, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Rachel Wenning, and I am a member of the Central Ohio Housing Action Network and also a member of the National Lawyers Guild National Council on Housing and Homelessness, although I am not representing them officially tonight. To begin with, I would like to thank you, Councilmember Favor, for taking the steps to implement some changes to our local code that will certainly benefit Columbus tenants. So-called renter's choice, however, should not be enacted. I believe this is exactly the type of legislation that we should be wary of, because while it appears innocuous or even helpful, it is not helpful. It is an increased burden on renters. It brings additional costs and increases the risk of eviction. There are a few problems with this legislation. One, if the tenant chooses to purchase security deposit insurance and fails to pay that bill, they are in breach of their rental lease. Landlords can offer security deposit insurance already, which I think Mr. Stein spoke to. There's nothing keeping them from doing that. What this bill really does is it gives landlords the power to evict tenants if they don't pay the security deposit insurance bill. We should not be creating new ways for tenants to be evicted, particularly now during a pandemic. Two, this legislation does not place a limit on the amount of insurance coverage that the landlord can require. There is a lower limit, but there's no upper limit. Under current Ohio law, if a landlord requires a security deposit of more than 1 month's rent, the landlord must pay the tenant interest on the amount over and above the month's rent. There's nothing in this legislation that offsets the additional burden on a tenant of being required to carry insurance for more than the value of a month's rent. And three, there's no language in this legislation addressing what happens if a landlord files a frivolous or wrongful claim after the tenant vacates a rental. If a landlord makes a claim on the policy for damages that were not caused by the tenant will have to fight an insurance company to prove they didn't cause damages. Currently, tenants have the right to go to court to try to recover a wrongfully withheld security deposit, but there's no protection in court for tenants whose landlords make false claims against their security deposit insurance policy. Those claims would damage the credit scores of low-income tenants as well. Security deposit insurance is essentially a tax on poor people who don't have an extra month's rent and savings. As the law currently stands, tenants who don't significantly damage their apartment can recover their full security deposit. That means they come out about even. The fees paid for security deposit insurance are never recovered. They are a benefit to landlords, yet the tenants have to pay extra for them. This same legislation was passed by Cincinnati City Council, and it was introduced to them by an insurance startup company, Rhino, who testified tonight, which should make it obvious who really stands to benefit from this kind of law. I believe that choice in deposits is a good idea, but I don't think that security deposit insurance should be one of those choices. There are many ways to make housing more affordable and accessible, which I would love to have the opportunity to discuss with you in the future, Ms. Favor. But I ask you to drop this item from the package and to implement the rental restricted income legislation only. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, and I will definitely be including you in the list of stakeholders to continue to engage with as we seek to work through the legislation. I think your points are valid, and I would definitely welcome the continued conversation. Thank you for your attendance and your testimony this evening. And last but certainly not least, we have Ali Malisic. And I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
It's Malesic, perfectly fine.
Malesic, thank you for being here this evening. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I am part of the Central Ohio Housing Action Network as well, and I'm also the DSA Housing Committee Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on this package of legislation. Requiring receipts when rent is paid is an important protection for tenants. And tenants facing eviction often have written notes of cash payments or money order stubs showing that they paid rent, but no confirmation from the landlord. This can lead to a very unbalanced relationship between landlord and tenant, and having written rental receipts will be beneficial to tenants and places a very slight burden on landlords. This is a simple, effective, and needed legislation, and I appreciate packaging it this way. Also, prohibiting discrimination based on source of income will also benefit Columbus renters. As you know, Bexley just passed this legislation, and other cities in Ohio are following suit. This legislation will make quality housing available to more tenants and will create remedies for them who do face discrimination. They often face racial and ethnic discrimination when landlords use housing vouchers as a legal means to refuse to rent to tenants who are Black, brown, or who speak a language other than English. Taking steps to eliminate this practice will benefit everyone in Columbus. However, please do not bring this renter's choice legislation before the full council. If landlords would like to offer tenants the option to purchase security deposit insurance, they can do that without any change in the law. Landlords can also completely waive security deposits if they like and purchase their own insurance against tenant damages, rolling that cost into the rent that they charge. This legislation is not necessary and is potentially very harmful to low-income tenants who will face increased costs, no protection from the courts, and new ways to be evicted. Specifically, all of the reviews for the company you are considering, Rhino Security, who testified tonight, are atrocious. They disproportionately overcharge tenants and do not give them their money back while simultaneously providing no customer service to tenants, the people they are claiming to be helping. Please do not let this company trick you into thinking that they are going to be supporting the residents who may be forced to use their services. It's no longer a deposit, and Rhino keeps all of it. It's also not even quite insurance. They protect the renter against nothing, as they'll come after them for any damages that they may pay out to the property owner. New legislation should be carefully evaluated to determine who stands to benefit from the changes, and it should only be implemented when it benefits the people in our community as a whole. I hope that these comments shed some light on the harms that will be created by renters insurance legislation and why it should not be adopted. We have enough legislation incentives for rich developers and other profiteers in Columbus, and we really need laws that actually help the people who live here. Thank you.
And thank you for your feedback tonight. Your comment, along with your colleagues, it's absolutely well received. I am the reason why we have engaged in this work in the manner in which we have engaged, because we want to help people who truly need help. And we see the renters, the idea of choosing whether or not you pay your security deposit in a traditional way, or you split that up over time, provides a person with a choice. And in the wake of the pandemic, and we understand that people are facing unemployment in record numbers, they're facing evictions in record numbers, that the position that, I apologize, somebody rings my doorbell, a person who is experiencing those types of emergencies is in a different predicament at this current moment than they might be, we hope, a year from now. And would this legislation assist them in this season of their life? So that's a little bit of the thought process behind the policy. But once again, we will be reaching out to everyone that provided testimony this evening to have additional conversation about the policy. So with that, I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to participate in this hearing tonight. I appreciate the opportunity for this dialogue and a chance to continue examining the measures we are considering. As a reminder, I do take these matters very seriously, and I do not intend to develop and pass policy without the input of all stakeholders. So in the coming days, I will continue to have conversations with interested parties and hope to continue moving forward with this housing agenda. For anyone that would like to continue to offer their thoughts and suggestions on these topics, please continue to reach out to my office. You can reach my office by contacting my legislative aide, Tynesha Hardin, at TY Hardin, that's HARDEN at columbus.gov, or Anissa Lieben at AALIBAN at columbus.gov. Additionally, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to thank my team, Tynesha Hardin, Andrew Dyer, and Anissa Lieben. Over the past month, we have engaged in numerous stakeholder conversations with not only housing providers and landlords, but with actual residents and members of our new American communities. I set the bar fairly high and my goals very high, and this team continued to deliver over and over again. So thank you from the bottom of my heart to my team for the hours of research and the deliberations, the intentional conversations that we've had to help us get us to this point. Thank you. I want to close tonight with a written testimony that was submitted to my office. Ms. Dora Anderson let me know that it was okay to share her story. My name is Dora Anderson. I have been a Section 8 tenant for close to 20 years. At the first of this month, my current landlord has decided not to renew our lease and asked me to leave the property. I have been trying to find a home that fits within my voucher range, but either the rent is just above my amount or the property does not accept Section 8. I am afraid of not only being able to find a home, but being out in the street as well. To say this situation is frustrating is an understatement. The rental company that canceled our lease has plenty of properties, but strangely doesn't accept Section 8, even though I have a voucher. It's confounding to me that this company doesn't rent to people on Section 8, but kept me as a tenant for 3 years. I either find a house too small that is in my voucher range that accepts it, find a home that is in the right size but out of my range, or find a home that accepts, to expand that a little bit, or find a home within my range that does not accept vouchers. Looking at the Section 8 website has proven to be fruitless. Either I can't reach the landlord, or it's a scam trying to get me to pay the deposit up front, even though we have never met. The pressure of trying to find a home suitable for me and my children has begun to send me into a depression. In my time of having a voucher, this has been the hardest time to find a home. I don't move around frequently. When I find a place, I stay there no less than 5 years. I'm not a troublemaker and never had issues with my neighbors. I just want to find a decent place that fits within my voucher range before my children and I have nowhere to go. I don't understand why it's so hard to do so. I don't understand why I can't find a landlord who will accept a voucher and the ones that do won't return my calls. I am supposed to be out on the 1st, but because of the difficulty in finding a suitable home, it does not appear that I will be able to do so. I am now attempting to look for rental assistance to give me 1 more month to find a place, and that has been equally difficult to do. I'm running out of options and feel as though I am at the end of my rope. It is my sincere hope that something will be done to make it easier to find housing for those of us who have vouchers. At this rate, it seems pointless to have a voucher if no one is willing to accept it. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to share. I want to thank you, Dor, for allowing me to share your story. Dor serves as just one example of why we are having this conversation tonight. She still needs help right now, and we will make sure she gets the housing assistance she needs. But we also need to make sure fewer individuals in our community find themselves in this situation. That concludes the hearing on the Housing Committee tonight. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.